We have a lot of changes happening during the month of December, so we're going to give you an overall snapshot on what to look for. Let's take a look at the next several days on the jet stream. What we're looking at is a pretty amplified track of a conveyor belt of moisture that's going to be inundating this region of the country across the southeast and into portions of the east coast. We also have a developing low pressure center that's also going to be developing off the east coast, while we have a colder intrusion that's mainly going to be impacting portions of New England. That could set the stage for a pretty significant snowstorm across this region. And we have a developing ridge of high pressure that's going to be moving in out west. That's really going to be elevating these temperatures out here and bring well above average temperature anomalies, especially entering portions of the west. Here's the jet stream, what we're looking at for the next couple of days. You can see that little bit of a dip that's mainly going to be impacting portions of the upper Great Lakes as well as into portions of New England. And as far as the precipitation front goes, here's where that amplified storm track is going to be taking place over the next couple of days through now and the fourth time frame. Yeah, some pretty heavy rains across this region. They desperately need the rain. You can see the graph in the bottom of the screen here. These areas in pink, 1 to 2 inches of heavy rainfall across these areas into the yellow, maybe into the orange area, into the Florida panhandle. Yeah, possibly 4 to 5 inches. But as this lifts further north, I showed you that low pressure center that's going to form off the east coast. And notice all this pink here across portions of New England. That's 1 to 2 inches of liquid. And that could transfer to a pretty good snow event up here. The data has been pretty consistent on this particular snowstorm. And I do think this is going to come to fruition around Monday and Tuesday of next week. So if you live up there in upstate New York and portions of Vermont, New Hampshire, and into Maine, I think you're going to get crushed with some heavier rains. And especially within this region, you could be picking up 12 to 18 inches upwards to heavy snow. So if you are new to the channel and like detailed weather breakdowns, hit the subscribe button and you're in. You get all my daily content on this channel. And I would love to reach 225,000 subscribers by the end of the year. You can help me get there by subscribing to the channel and following all my daily content. So let's take a look at the setup going forward, because I mentioned the amplified lift of the ridge, and wow, this is pretty impressive, folks. That's a lot of heat for December standards. Look how far north that jet stream lifts, all the way into Canada. So that means all this area underneath is going to be well above average, while the only coolness in town is still going to be across portions of the far northeast, where they have that snowpack from all the snow they're going to be impacting across that region, and the colder anomalies will still be entrenched in that area. But for the rest of the country, wow, yeah, we're looking at plenty of warm air, right? I mean, these are your overall temperature anomalies. This is how far potentially above average you could be by that Thursday, December the 7th time frame. Yeah, anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees. But once you get up here in the northern plains here, 20 to 25 degrees above average. And look all the way the warm surge into Canada. That's a pretty impressive ridge. It's going to be impacting these regions. But notice the cooler anomalies, right? Complements of that trough, that little bit of a dip in the jet stream, and of course the snowpack under this region. That's why you're keeping those temperatures on the colder side. But what's happening as we get beyond that? So we've got that ridge, right? So that was out west, but so by the time we hit to the 10th of the month, that ridge will be slowly shifting. New England's trying to hang on with those colder temperatures, but all eyes will be trending out west again, because we do have another fairly significant trough that's going to be building in off the west coast. That's going to bring some cooler anomalies back in the picture, but also set the stage for beneficial rains across the southern portions of California, being back into portions of the Four Corners regions, and that would likely set the stage for a pretty heavy snowfall across portions of the Rockies. So as that low pressure moves in, that's going to bring some colder air back with it. That could bring also some heavier snows across this region towards into Wyoming, back into the Colorado region. Yes, those places in Denver, back into the Colorado Springs region. would likely bring, heavy snow again, and that would likely dip into portions of New Mexico, and that would shift eventually heading into Nebraska and portions of Kansas. So if we look at the overall surface map, by the time we get to that 10th of the month in December, yeah, there's that low pressure, right? We've got the heavier snows that'll be moving into the Rockies, back into portions of New Mexico. That will swing in again in portions of Nebraska, getting into Kansas again. We've got that low pressure will be highlighted over Texas, bringing some healthy rains across those regions, back into Oklahoma, through portions of eastern Kansas by then. And that low pressure center will continue to move all rain out ahead of it across this region into the southeast, through portions of Tennessee, back into Kentucky. And then you got the snow on the backside, on the northwest side of that low pressure center, through portions of, shifting more into Kansas and back through even into portions of Iowa by that time frame of the 11th of the month. But overall, that second week, you get into that 10th and 17th time frame of December. Yeah, pretty amplified, pretty stormy across this region still. And on the wetter side, across a good part of at least the eastern half of Texas, through Oklahoma, and across these portions into the southeast, through the Ohio Valley, and much into the Carolinas, through a good part of the mid-Atlantic, and that trends up there in towards portions of the Northeast. And yes, by the time we head to that 10th and 17th of the month, it's as that ridgeal high pressure will be moving through, that brings the trough underneath, so that brings the cooler anomalies across this region, while much of the northern half of the U.S. will start to heat up. So you finally start to heat up after you've been pretty cold across this region into the Northeast by the time we hit likely towards the middle of December. And what that would look like as far as the snow front, as that low pressure comes through, yes, we could be picking up some more significant snows across the Rockies, likely more snows inner portions of New Mexico by then, back into the Texas Panhandle, entering portions of Kansas, back into Nebraska. And yes, you guys finally in Minnesota might actually see some snow out of this deal, but that will likely not be until the 10th and 11th time frame of the month, and that would likely shift into Wisconsin as well as in a good part of Michigan by then. But let me remind you, we're going into an El Nino, and this is what you would typically find in an El Nino winter. As we get in closer towards winter and get deeper into the winter months, what we're going to find is you've got two jet streams, right? You got your polar jet stream, you got your southern jet stream. And typically in an El Nino, you got this polar jet is less active, just overall, just less active in an El Nino type setup. That means warmer anomalies across Alaska and across our northern half of the US, and drier conditions. And then you have your subtropical jet, your southern branch of the jet stream, that implies you've got more troughs digging in off the west coast. You would likely have a storm track that would elongate across this region, and likely this brings above average rains typically, but it also at the same time could bring some snow across this region. All you have to do is time up the colder air and these amplified more storm tracks, and if this is that increases the probability, you would have a higher chances of seeing some snow mixed in at times when the colder air comes down further south. So what we're looking at after we get towards the 15th is the more eyes on the polar vortex. Now we've had two, not disruptions, but more or less stretching events of the polar vortex so far. Remember that cold snap we had towards Halloween. We also had another cold snap that we just came out of around Thanksgiving. So now we're retreating. The polar vortex is retreating further north, bottled up there towards the Arctic. That keeps the colder there. But by the time we head to the 15th, we're starting to see a little bit of elongation again. We're starting to see a little bit more stretching out of the polar vortex. And this is what it would look like, when it's stable right now, and that's where it is right now. It's pretty stable. It's back up in the Arctic. It's bundled all the Arctic air. And I showed you that jet stream lifting all the way to Canada, right? I mean, that warm surge, that's the polar vortex lifting well back up into Canada. But the 15th starts to show increasing signs of elongation again, back of a stretching again. It's going to take a little bit. It's going to take a little bit to filter further south, but I do feel this becomes wavy. Again, it starts to buckle, starts to shift, colder intrusions back into the lower 48. So yes, by the time we hit around the 20th of the month, right, we're going to have and probably another storm track, another amplified low pressure center like we do on the 10th. We'll have another one around the 20th set up across the west and portions of the desert southwest. At the same time, we're likely going to have some colder intrusions by then down from the polar vortex from that stretching and sending pulses of colder air into the lower 48. And that would likely time up with more an amplified storm track by then. So by the time we get to Christmas week and then heading into New Year's, it becomes pretty interesting for areas further to the south and much of the East Coast, because this is the overall setup on some of the ensemble members right now. And it's pretty amplified as this system comes across with, as the colder intrusions, this would meet up with a much more active storm track. And we could be looking at a potential kind of a northeastern type setup as we get closer to Christmas week. And here's what the snowfall on the ensembles print out right now. So we're going to have that more amplified track coming through, moving across a good part further to the south, and then potentially coming up the East Coast. And likely that would bring some healthy snows across this region, maybe even points down to the I-95 corridor by then. Could be seeing some snow across this region. And what's interesting, a lot of the even though some of the longer range guidance, the CFS guidance, is also kind of implying the same thing, as we have a pretty significant storm track. You got the lower end of the jet stream. You'd likely have another storm track across the 28th, 29th of the month, bringing back into the 4 1/4 region, bringing some heavier snows across this region back into Texas. And this would likely be moving across towards we get to that Christmas week and Christmas, New Year's time frame. Likely possibly a pretty, maybe some healthy snows across this region, racing up through the mid-Atlantic as well as into portions of the Northeast. And it just stays active, folks. I mean, as we have the more buckling of the jet stream, and we see, by the time we get to that New Year's Day time frame, this storm track even becomes more pronounced. So we're looking at what we're looking at here is after the 20th, it definitely appears that we start to set the stage for likely more colder intrusions and a much more active subtropical jet stream coming across the south and from the west through the south and up the southeast and into the eastern seaboard. And that just continues going into that first week of January. So it looks pretty active, what we're looking at right now from that December 20th timeframe, at least through the first week of January. For those 2 weeks, it definitely looks on the colder side and definitely looks on the wetter and potentially snowier side. And you could see even some places further south with some snow by then if all this kind of comes to fruition. But yes, we've got increasing guidance that an ensemble members are showing that particular jet stream. We've got the stretching of the polar vortex, and we've got longer range CFS guidances kind of implying the same thing. So if all that kind of comes together, yeah, it's not out of the question. We could be talking, potentially some snow at least across further areas across the south, as these systems just would increase the probability of potentially snow as the colder air intrudes in, as the more amplified storm track comes across further to the south. And that would lay a blanket of heavier snows across a good part of the mid-Atlantic as well as into the Northeast by then. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch the next update where I protect you before and after the storm.